This week, we're talking about pantsing versus plotting. And if you hear a loud rumbling in the background, forgive me, they're doing construction downstairs. Oh, goodness. On Monday, we talked about the pros and cons of pantsing, which is how I naturally write. Today, I want to talk about plotting. So plotting really just means writing out the plot before you start the book. And people do this in a million different ways. There are all sorts of different plotting methods that people use to understand the story structure and to identify character relationships and all of that kind of stuff. There are literally too many to list here, but if you just go on Google and you type in how to plot my book, you're going to get dozens that pop up. Rather than talking specifically about how you should be plotting your book, I want to talk about the pros and cons of plotting, because there are good things about it and there are some challenges. The one thing that all plotters agree on is that your book needs some sort of outline. This can range from a few sentences about each scene or each chapter to meticulously detailed notes, ranging in the hundreds of pages. In fact, when an author sells a manuscript to a publishing house, if they've been in the industry for a while, often all they'll turn in is an outline. And that outline will go through a couple of edits, and they'll get notes back, and they'll refine their outline. And then once everybody's happy with it, they'll sell the book. And then they'll go and write it. And sometimes those outlines can get as long as 70 pages, which is just a tremendous amount of work for a book that you haven't yet written. That's the pantser in me talking. But a lot of writers actually find it incredibly helpful to give that level of detail to the world and the story and the plot that they're about to set out and write. They work really well from that structure because it identifies all of the things that they have to pay attention to. Typically, an outline is going to consist of a couple of things. You're going to have your scene structure, which is sort of how the story will flow at a macro level. And then you're going to have your beats, which are individual movements inside of the scenes, which will give you your microstructure. And then you'll have notes on the characters and on the relationships, on all of the important lore and everything else. And from that, your macro view and your micro view and your notes, you can construct your novel. If pantsing is sort of a freewheeling exploration of a world and of a story, then plotting is exploring the world with a guidebook and an itinerary. Neither is wrong, they're just different preferences. Imagine you were traveling to another country. Would you plan out your trip meticulously and get a guidebook so that you knew exactly what you were looking at? Or would you just buy your ticket and show up? And actually, the answer to that question might tell you whether you're a pantser or a plotter. But let's talk about what's good about plotting. Plotted novels tend to have much tighter stories. The experience that the reader has as they're reading it tends to be more finely tuned, and often the feeling that it produces is more closely aligned with what the author intended. There's much less room for interpretation, which, if a book is a vehicle for delivering the author's intent, is actually a fantastic thing. The second thing is that you tend not to lose the threads. It's much easier in a heavily plotted novel to introduce a subplot in one place and then pick it up in another place. It's much easier to make sure that you're dotting all of your I's and crossing all of your T's. You tend not to lose pieces of the story just because you're forgetting them. On top of that, it's possible to create richer character motivation if you are spending more time really understanding what the characters are trying to do. And plotting gives you that opportunity. You spend more time studying the subject, you're going to have a better grasp of it as you start to create. Furthermore, it can save you time. Often, when you're plotting a novel, because you've done all of that pre-work, it's pretty simple to just get in there and write out the scenes because you've already thought about each and every one of them so much. But what's the flip side? Well, there are some cons to plotting as well. Sometimes you get so focused on what you're trying to do that the work becomes dry. It lacks the moments of wonder and surprise that make really good novels really good. It's sort of the difference between seeing a butterfly collection and butterflies out in a field. Yes, a butterfly collection is beautiful, but there's no life there. And so sometimes it's harder to inject that life into your work because it's been so meticulously planned out. At the end of the day, plotting and pantsing are just two different styles. Neither one is better or worse than the other. Plotters have a huge number of advantages, but one of the things that they have to overcome is the rigidness of their structure. But I'm curious, do you find yourself tending to plot or write by the seat of your pants? Let me know down in the comments below. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I've written 26 books. I've published most of them. And I make these videos because there are a lot of authors who are lost out there, and I don't want you to be one of them.